Daniel's hand slammed the kitchen door open, and a ceramic mug jumped in Claire Bennett's grip. Betrayal drove the way Claire set the mug down without looking at him. She did not say his name at first. She moved methodically, folding a blue cardigan into the final cardboard box on the table, while Daniel stood in the doorway and spoke too fast. "Claire, please, listen to me," he said, stepping over the threshold as if the house belonged to both of them again. Claire kept her back to him and counted the folded layers with small, steady motions. She heard his footsteps and then his breath. The central problem was clear within those first seconds. Daniel had returned to ask forgiveness and to prove he had changed. Claire had already chosen to leave. She had been packing for 2 nights. She had placed a pillbox into a drawer, wrapped the thin gold locket in tissue, and labeled a small shoebox for Sophie. Packing had been her action against the pattern of broken promises. Daniel's arrival forced a choice into one room. You'd go to counseling. Daniel, you'd stop drinking. "I'm on time now, Claire." "I kept my appointments." Claire folded the cardigan and did not turn. Her fingers were steady, but her jaw worked. The first shift arrived as doubt. His hand on the doorframe made her check the calendar on the fridge, where she had circled nights he had missed. She could name nights when he was late, nights when she waited with a plate gone cold. Sophie pushed through the hall before Daniel could finish a second apology. "Claire, what is going on?" Sophie, voice flat. She stepped between them and picked up a plate on the counter, with precisely the kind of ordinary motion that made the scene domestic instead of theatrical. Claire looked at Sophie and then at Daniel. The second shift moved under her skin, skepticism tightening into anger. She had kept receipts, notes, and a folded notebook of her own. She had learned to measure promises by their footprints. "Sophie, he's not," Claire began, and stopped because Daniel reached into his coat and took out a folded letter and a thin spiral notebook with dog-eared pages. Daniel put them on the table. "Look," he said, "these are appointments. Look at the dates. Look at the receipts." He opened the notebook like proof could rearrange the past. Sophie glanced at the pages. "You kept these?" she asked, not looking at Daniel but at the facts he presented. "Yes, I screwed up, Sophie. I know I did. Claire, I know I was late. I know I failed you. But I'm different now." His voice carried urgency and the tiredness of someone who had rehearsed this scene in other houses and failed. Claire lifted the mug and set it into the cardboard box as if closing a small door on a memory. "Different isn't the same as being here, Dan," she said. The line was short, clear. It held her choice. They argued in short bursts. Daniel's sentences came quickly. "Claire, I went every Tuesday. I called the support line at night. I stopped going into bars on Thursday. I quit before I told you because I knew you'd feel pressured." He pushed facts across the table. "And where were you the nights our daughter had the fever?" "Sophie." Her voice cut into Daniel's list. "Where were you on Saturday when the babysitter called?" Sophie used Claire's name and then a question to keep the focus on decisions that mattered. Claire stood and walked to the window. Her hands flattened on the sill. "Don't turn this into paperwork," she said. "Do you think a notebook will fix the bruise on my trust?" Dan swallowed. "I don't expect a notebook to fix that. I only..." At that moment, Alex Rivera's key scraped the lock and the front door opened. Alex stepped into the entry with a grocery bag in one hand and his jacket slung over his arm. He looked at Daniel, then at Claire, and set the bag down in a particular way that made his role clear. He belonged here now. Alex's presence ramped the scene's tension. The third emotion shift moved Claire from skepticism into protective steadiness. She did not need to speak at first. Alex's shoulders relaxed in the way of a man who had arrived on his own terms and refused to be shoved aside. "Alex, Claire." Her voice had a steadier pitch. "This is Dan." She used his old nickname with no softness. Alex's eyes stayed on Daniel. "Claire, are you okay?" he asked. "I'm packing," Claire answered. Sophie stepped closer and said, "Dan, you need to leave." Now, Sophie did not raise her voice. It was the plain tone of someone who had intervened in fights before and had learned how to stop them. Daniel reached across the table. His fingers brushed Claire's arm in a pleading motion. "Claire, please, I can prove I've changed. I can be the man you needed me to be. Let me show you." Claire heard the rawness in his baritone voice. He looked at her with blue, gray eyes that suddenly seemed earnest. She saw a faint line at his temple and the small stubble on his jaw. Those details had not moved her before. Now they were evidence of a man who had been worn by late regrets. Claire took a breath. Her hands were steady when she said, "Daniel, you promised last year. You promised the year before that. You broke us 3 times. This house is packed because I cannot wait for a 4th time." There was a quick exchange, 3 lines back and forth, between Sophie and Daniel that tightened like a wire. "You made a promise and then you left. I didn't leave on purpose. Sophie, you left every night we needed you." The rapid dialogue dug into specifics. A missed concert, a cold child at 2 in the morning, a forgotten anniversary dinner. Each reminder was a small nail. Daniel tried to apologize again. He reached for Claire with both hands. Alex stepped forward, placing a hand on Daniel's arm to keep him back. Claire snapped, "Stop." The single word cut the motion. The confrontation escalated quickly toward the threshold. Daniel lunged slightly, and Alex tightened his hold. Sophie, Claire's name in a tone that had a legal finality to it. "Claire, are you sure?" Claire felt a clarity settle, not a romantic clarity, but the clarity of a woman who had rehearsed safety plans. She walked to the door, picked up the fallen worn leather jacket Daniel had dropped when he came in, and set it on the top of the last box as if the jacket were a document to be filed. "I am sure, Claire. I'm sure because I have been sure for months. I watched you leave us more than you were here. I'm choosing the life that keeps my family whole." Dan's face changed to an expression that matched the chapter's motif. Regret arrived too late. He dropped his head and then looked up, and the grief showed in the way his shoulders moved. He spoke in softer bursts now. "Claire, I know I've been selfish. I started going to meetings. I started writing everything down. I bought a notebook because I couldn't trust myself to remember the days I said I'd be better. I'm trying." Sophie folded her arms. "Trying in private is not the same as showing up in public," she said. "Show up when it matters. Show up when the child cries. Show up when you promised." Claire's hands tightened around the cardboard box. She had learned to show her resolve through choices rather than speeches. She set the box down, closed the lid, and taped it shut. Each motion was short and deliberate. "Claire, Daniel, let me prove it to you. Give me a month. Let me help with the move. Let me go with you to the counselor. I'll do whatever you ask." Claire turned the key in the lock with small, controlled gestures. "You don't get to demand terms now, Dan. This isn't negotiation time. This is consequence time." She his name once, then placed it into the sentence as if sealing an envelope. Alex moved closer to Claire without touching her. "If you need anything, Claire, I'll be at the house tonight. I called a friend to bring the van. We'll finish what you started." His voice was precise and practical. Daniel's face flushed. He took a step back. "Sophie, leave the jacket. Don't ask her to pick it up. Just go." Her words were deliberate, and they shifted the action externally. An instruction, a demand to leave. Daniel reached down, grabbed the jacket, then stopped. He let it drop on the doorstep and did not retrieve it. The act was small and specific. He left the jacket like a failed last gesture. Then he walked away down the path under the street lamp. He did not look back until he had reached the curb. Standing there, he looked up at the house. From the upstairs window, a soft square of light made his silhouette visible to someone watching the street. Claire finished packing the last box at the kitchen table. Sophie's hands moved with quiet efficiency. Alex stacked folded towels into the load he would carry out. Their actions were practical, their speech sparse. The emotional shift toward resolve settled into Claire's limbs. She did not feel triumphant. She felt steadied. "Sophie, you did the right thing." Claire closed the tape with a firm hand and wrote "kitchen" on the side of the box. The label was not a flourish. It was evidence. Outside, Daniel paused under the lamplight and checked his phone like a man waiting for a message that would not arrive. He opened the notebook again, thumbed through receipts and appointment dates, and then put it back into his coat. He had made a visible effort, but the timing had already decided the outcome. Claire stepped out onto the porch with Alex beside her. She carried a small black shoebox with Sophie waving from the doorway. The street was soft, golden where the lamp hit the pavement. Claire did not turn to face the house again. She had already folded that action into the decisions she and Sophie had made. From the upstairs window, Daniel watched them walk down the path and move toward the van. His breath fogged the glass faintly. He pressed a palm to the window frame with a line of salt on his face, where sweat had mixed with a tear. Sophie slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. Alex lifted boxes into the back while Claire put the shoebox gently on his knee and then closed the van door. She touched the thin gold locket at her throat before she climbed in, fingers precise and deliberate. Daniel watched until the van pulled away. Then he placed his hands in his pockets and walked away in the other direction, past the lamplight, past the house he had once tried to call home. Claire breathed out as the van bumped over the curb. She did not say anything for a long moment. Alex looked over and said, "You did the right thing, Claire," she answered with emotion. She unclasped the locket for an instant and slid it into the shoebox. That small act closed a loop. They drove in silence for half the hour that followed, stopping only when Sophie Claire to rest. Claire pressed her temple against the window and let the street lamps and the lines of houses pass like marked checkpoints. Her face did not soften into a speech, but the muscles of her jaw loosened as if a tightness had been cut. Back at the house, Daniel unlocked the gate and stood under the same street lamp. He touched the fallen jacket with the edge of his hand but did not pick it up. He could feel the shape of a life he had lost and the precise list of ways he had not been present. Regret sat in his chest like a physical object, heavy enough to make him move slower. Claire's last act in the house was to place the jacket aside and lock the door. She did not take it with her. She walked out with Alex and Sophie, closed the car door, and the van pulled away. From the upstairs window, Daniel watched until they turned a corner and the taillights became a single small red point. The chapter ends with a concrete beat. The jacket left on the doorstep, a locked door, and Daniel watching from the shadowed sidewalk. Claire had acted on betrayal and moved through doubt and skepticism into a resolved choice. The scene closed because she closed a door and walked away. That decision landed with an ordinary sound, the slam of the van door, and a small image of a man reading his own notebook under a street lamp. No speeches about destiny followed, no broad reflections about a new life. There was only the jacket on the step, and the quiet of someone who had finally understood that timing can decide what love becomes. Claire pushed the pen across the last line and did not look up when the clerk dropped the stamped page into the folder. Suspicion tightened her voice when "Sophie, it's done, Claire." And Claire folded her fingers around the folder, as if it were a map she had to read one careful step at a time. The clerk's rubber stamp sounded again like a little gavel. That sound made the marriage legally finished and made the problem she had been living with plain and visible. Claire felt suspicion shift into a slow, steady resolve. This was not about him changing. It was about keeping Oliver safe and making a home that did not tremble every time the door moved. They left the tiny municipal room with the smell of old paper and bleach in the air. Sophie matched Claire's pace down the corridor. "You okay?" "Sophie, I'm fine." Claire, but her jaw tightened when she repeated the word. Sophie watched the folder at Claire's chest like it might open again and spill argument or apology onto the floor. Outside, a sudden voice called Claire's name. Daniel's shoes hit the sidewalk before he did. He arrived with his coat unbuttoned and his hair flattened at the temple. He held out a folded page of promises in one hand. Cars moved past, indifferent. "Daniel, Claire, please, just look," his voice pitched quick with urgency. Sophie stepped in front of Claire. "Dan, you can't do this here." "Sophie, this is over." The neighbor across the street turned and watched. "Claire, please, Daniel." And his hands trembled when he opened the paper and tapped a line. Claire felt a second emotion rise, anger. That anger sat beside the suspicion and pushed her body forward like a shield. "Daniel, stop." Claire's voice was low enough to keep strangers from leaning in, but loud enough for him to hear. "You can't hand me written promises and expect the months you missed to evaporate." She set the stamped folder on the bench and kept her eyes steady on the inked page he held. Daniel's expression changed when she mentioned the months. Shame tightened his mouth. He rushed a list of explanations. "I went to meetings. I met with Dres. I wrote everything down. Look, receipts, dates." He tapped the paper. "I've done the work." Sophie touched Claire's shoulder. Oliver's name crossed Claire's mind like a lighted sign. She had to think of him first. She broke her stare toward Dan with tight, small movements. "Oliver needs steady mornings, Daniel. He needs someone who answers the door at 7 for school." He needs promises kept without drama. That was practical, that was not accusation. Daniel, I know I failed. But I've been trying to, he paused, then added, please, let me show you. There were 3 quick breaths. Then he turned suddenly toward Claire as if he had rehearsed a speech and wanted it to land. Claire, I slammed that door before, he said, and his voice carried back the image of the kitchen that had already been burned into her memory since the night the mug jumped and the cardigan was folded into a box. I slammed the door. I broke things. I'm sorry, he used the word apology like a tool he thought would open her. Claire, you that before. Daniel, her hands clasped the folder tighter. The anger softened into a wary patience. This was the second emotion shift, anger to guarded skepticism. She remembered the night from the first chapter, the ceramic mug jumping in her hand when his hand slammed the kitchen door, and she felt the memory as a series of clear facts. The chip on the mug, the blue cardigan in a box on the table, the way Oliver had watched them from the stairs. Those facts had weight. They were not feelings she could fold away with a page. Sophie stepped forward. Claire, maybe we should go. Come on, Sophie, it's steady, practical. Claire took a breath and let Sophie guide her away. Daniel stood on the sidewalk and watched them go. He did not call after them. He let the folder of promises hang open like a gesture. The neighbor returned to his mail. Back at Claire's kitchen that evening, the apartment smelled of lemon and a pot of soup Sophie had placed on the stove. Claire and Sophie sat at the small table among boxes they had already labeled. Oliver's backpack hung from the hook by the door. The second scene of packing felt exact. A worn scarf, a chipped mug, a photograph of Claire and Oliver at a county fair, their smiles frozen in mid-laugh. Claire set items into boxes with methodical movements. Each object had a reason for staying or going. You were really taking the job. Sophie, when Claire handed her the sealed letter from the company 3 towns over. Claire nodded. Yes, it will be better for Oliver. Different school, different start times. Sophie broke a breadstick and offered half. We'll sign the lease tomorrow. Sophie, I came early to help you look. Claire put the thin gold locket into a small padded box and slipped it into her satchel. She did not speak about the way the locket warmed against her chest when she reached for it. Instead, she folded the sweater and closed the lid. They heard a soft knock at the door that made them both stop. Claire stood and walked to the door with her hand on the knob. The knock came again, firmer. She opened the door a fraction. Claire, it's me. I left something on your table earlier. Daniel's voice came from the hallway. He held out a small envelope as if the act were ordinary. Sophie planted herself behind Claire. Oliver leaned at the doorway, eyes wide. Claire's chest tightened with a different motion. Protectiveness. She took the envelope and held it without opening it. The paper was the plain brown of a professional hand, delivered message. That night, when Oliver slept, Claire unfolded the envelope over the living room lamp. Inside was a worn journal and a stack of slip receipts for support meetings and a short, typed note from Gerard, Ray's assistant, confirming Daniel's attendance and measured progress. Claire read the assistant's lines aloud softly. Daniel Mercer has attended 12 sessions between March and August with documented attendance and participation. The paper felt flat and ordinary. The facts inside shifted the ledger of her decisions by a small but specific amount. Claire set the journal on the coffee table. The pages were full of cramped, honest handwriting. Dates, triggers, notes about late nights, attempts to call. There were entries with small, brutal clarity. Missed school pickup, Oliver upset, apology left on table. Reading those lines made Claire's skepticism tilt toward a new motion. Curiosity laced with caution. That was the third emotion shift. Skepticism into tentative attention. She could not accept the journal as absolution, but she could not pretend it had no effect. Daniel came that evening and sat on the couch, shoulders forward, hands clasped. He waited for Claire to speak. Why did you bring this here? Claire, without looking up. Her voice kept steady cadence. Because I knew you would need proof, Daniel. Because I wanted you to see that I'm trying. He lifted his chin as if a small man could hold himself straighter that way. I didn't bring it to change your mind right away. I brought it so you would know I couldn't just say words anymore. His hands were damp. He put the journal gently on the table as if placing something fragile. Claire named the conditions she needed without drama. Daniel, I need steady mornings. I need you to be where you say you'll be when you say you'll be there. I need Oliver to come first without theatrics. She spoke in measured statements. Facts, not pleas. Daniel answered in short lines. I'll set alarms. I'll be there at 7. I'll call before every pickup. Claire listened. Sophie moved between them like a guard, but she did not block the conversation. She a question. Dan, can you prove you will keep the routine next week? The question landed like a net. Daniel swallowed. Yes, he said, and then, quieter, I'll sign up for a roster at Oliver's school. I'll get a key to his class. I'll show receipts for rides. They traded 3 rapid lines, each one an attempt to test the work against the speech. At the school gate the next afternoon, Daniel approached Oliver with a simple, practical question about lunch preferences and morning routine. Oliver, what do you like for school lunches? Daniel, crouching to the boy's height. Oliver, nothing at first, then mumbled, ham. Mrs. Partle, the neighbor, stood nearby and watched with a little frown. Claire, Oliver, come here. She kept her voice even. Daniel about the bus schedule and named the teacher's initial. He used details as if they would stitch trust together. Claire noticed him keeping his hands visible and his sentences short. Mrs. Patel cleared her throat. Claire, your son is brave, she said. Her voice carried a small, practical kindness. Claire thanked her and moved Oliver toward the gate. The exchange left Claire assessing not only Daniel's words but his physical steadiness. Did he call at the right time? Did he arrive on the right day? She felt the third emotion shift, harden into clarity. She could catalogue improvements without letting them dictate forgiveness. The clarity was practical and precise. That night, Daniel brought receipts and a small list of meeting dates to the living room table again. He opened the worn journal and read a line aloud, voice low. October 3rd. Learn to stop talking through anger. Called Sophie to ask about strategies. He looked up quickly. I know it's late to ask, Claire. I know it might be too late to change what you felt then. He closed his hands around the journal with a kind of careful gentleness. Claire listened to the sentences. She watched the way his fingers traced the paper. She answered with a list of the promises he had broken. Missed school pickups, the night the mug jumped, the blue cardigan in the box. She spoke in short, exact lines, as if each item could be set down and weighed. You promised you'd be here, Daniel. You promised. I can't let Oliver's schedule depend on whether you'll remember. The argument became rapid then. 3 to 5 quick exchanges where each line clipped the next. Claire, please. Daniel, please give me a chance. Daniel, you had chances? Claire replied. You had many, I know, he said. I know I failed you. But I've been trying to fix it. Trying isn't the same as being there, Claire answered. The back and forth kept their voices short and the stakes plain. Daniel ran his fingers through his hair when he grew anxious. Claire folded her hands and held the folder against her hip like a shield. At midnight there was the confrontation that would decide everything. Daniel stood on the porch and begged in measured bursts. Claire held the door and refused him entry. He reached out and she closed the door on his hand. The sound of the latch clicking shut was small and absolute. Daniel's palm pressed against the wood for a moment and then fell away. The action was concrete. A hand reaching, a door closing. That moment marked the chapter's emotional climax, and it matched the one beat that had been marked as the climax earlier. Claire did not make a speech. No, it was one word. Daniel, her name, then said it again. He tried to explain. She felt a new emotion that night. Sorrow edged with firmness. It was not the raw anger she had when the mug jumped, nor the suspicion at the registry. It was an economy of sorrow that translated into a clear decision. Daniel pressed his forehead to the wood and spoke 3 short lines. I am sorry. I am trying. Please. Claire tightened her fingers on the doorknob and said nothing more. An unexpected interruption came when a plain envelope slid under the door and landed at Claire's shoe. A delivery note from Dra. Razor's assistant confirmed the clinical record she had just read. For a second, Claire's chest rose with a small jolt. Could clinical proof change what she had decided? That little surprise served as a mid-chapter cliffhanger. She crouched, picked up the envelope, and read. The assistant had written, Mercer has completed 12 sessions with noted participation and follow-up plan. The words were factual. The facts shifted the ledger again, but they did not carry the power to undo the night's closed latch. At dawn, Claire packed a small wooden box with a ring and the single photograph of the three of them at the county fair. She put the journal on the shelf and slid the receipts into a folder she would keep for record. She closed the apartment door behind her with a soft but determined movement. The street was wet from overnight rain and the puddles mirrored the amber street lamps. Claire walked across the slick pavement with the box tucked in her bag. She felt resolve in the soles of her shoes. Later, with Sophie at the leasing office, Claire signed the lease on a small apartment in a building with a narrow staircase and a view of plain trees. The agent stamped the paper and handed it back. Sophie clasped Claire's hand and said, "You did it." Claire looked at the stamped lease and then at Sophie. "For Oliver, Claire." The pronoun carried everything she would not say out loud: boundaries, protection, the life she chose. She slid the thin gold locket into a drawer in the empty kitchen and looked through the window toward the street she had walked across that morning. Daniel's journal remained on the shelf at Claire's old living room. Sophie had insisted she keep the receipts, if only to prove the truth of what Daniel had done. Claire had kept one of Daniel's sentences in her mind like a measurement. He had said, "I can't change the time when I hurt you, but I can change what I do next." That line did not move her to a decision of reunion. Instead, Claire used it to set boundaries. Proof would be noticed, not accepted blindly. When the house was quiet, Claire answered plainly, "We are moving, Oliver." He a simple question about school. And she told him the name of the new school and the time the bus would come. She kept the sentences short and clear so that he could hold them. Oliver put his small hand in hers, and she felt the fact of him rather than the ghost of the marriage. By the end of the chapter, the immediate conflict had been resolved. The final papers were signed. Daniel had delivered documented evidence of work. Claire had refused to reopen the door that night. And she had chosen to move on with a lease in hand. The emotional movement, suspicion to anger, anger to guarded skepticism, skepticism to cautious attention, and finally to clear resolve, had led to concrete choices. The decision at the door, the packed wooden box, the signed lease. Claire had referenced the earlier event, the slammed door and the flying mug, from memory as a factual anchor for her refusal to accept promises without demonstration. The sealed envelope from Jack Therese's assistant and the worn journal introduced an unexpected twist. Specific proof that complicated but did not overturn her decision. Claire walked across the wet street at dawn and placed the small wooden box in her satchel. She closed the lid and felt the cool metal of the ring through the fabric. She signed the lease with her name and an exact, even hand. The chapter ended not with a proclamation of rebirth but with a clear, concrete action. Claire closed the little wooden box, slid it into her bag, and locked the door behind her as she stepped toward the new apartment and the timetable she had set for Oliver's mornings. Emotion roots suspicion. Emotion shifts suspicion, anger, guarded skepticism, cautious attention, clarity, and resolve. A knock on the front door came 3 times, loud and intentional. Claire Bennett held a half-packed mug at her chest and did not move for a long heartbeat. She had learned to read the small, urgent patterns that followed Daniel's visits. Raised voice at midnight, a slammed door, one promise after another that failed. Betrayal had shaped the way she measured distance. The word sat in her jaw and guided the way she answered the knock. Claire set the mug on the table and walked to the porch without opening the night air with a question. The porch light painted Daniel Mercer in warm yellow, rain-streaked collar and a worn leather jacket clinging to him as if the jacket could hold him together. Her name before she opened the door. "Claire, please. I need 5 minutes. Let me say this." His voice carried the quickness that came when he tried to outrun what he'd done. She closed the door behind her and did not let him step in. "Daniel," she said, and kept her hand flat on the wood. "You already said it, Daniel." You at 100 times her words were measured. Her mouth did not shake. She had practiced steady lines for months. He reached forward and stopped a cautious step from the threshold. Rain speckled his hair. I know I said the wrong things. He swallowed. "I have paperwork, I have proof. I want to show you." His hands opened, palms raw with urgency. Claire backed up 3 steps into the narrow entry, and the mug clinked as it touched the side table. She let silence stand where fury might have been. The mug's ring left a wet circle on the wood. "Show me what?" she asked. Within 5 sentences the stakes were clear. Daniel wanted to reopen a life Claire had been arranging to leave. The concrete problem hung between them, a man asking for a second chance after the family had reorganized itself without him. Claire's immediate response came from the habit betrayal had taught her. She tested evidence before she felt anything else. The sound of footsteps in the kitchen pulled them back about 2 steps of distance, and then a third voice, Claire, who is at the door. Sophie called from the low light near the sink. She moved into the doorway with a dish towel in hand and folded shoulders like a brace. Sophie had been the steady one since the separation. She spoke with the bluntness of someone who had counted days and payments and small mercies. "It's Daniel, Claire." She kept her voice flat. "He says he has proof." Sophie frowned and turned her head. "Proof of what?" she asked. Her tone carried a practical suspicion, the kind that asks for receipts. The question tightened the room. Daniel held out a thin envelope. "Contracts, job offer, bank statements, a plan." The words quickly, fingers working the edges of the paper. "Claire, I can show you how I changed. I can show you a schedule, a counselor's note. I can show you everything I did wrong and everything I'm trying to do right." He tried to step closer, and Sophie stepped in front of Claire without thinking. "Step back, Daniel." "Sophie, show them to the clerk or to a judge if you have to. Don't put them on our table like they're a script." For the first time since he arrived, Daniel looked small on the porch. He shifted his weight and ran his fingers through his hair. "Sophie, please. Claire, please. This is different. I sold the motorcycle. I put money into a savings account for Emma. I have a notarized schedule. I'm asking for a chance to finish what I started." His voice tried to make a bridge out of facts. Claire listened and scanned him for the old patterns beneath the apology. She thought of the kitchen door slammed in the first chapter and the mug knocked off the table. She thought of the folder with the stamped page from the clerk, the divorce papers Sophie had watched her sign. The memory of the clerk's rubber stamp hitting paper stayed concrete in her mind. She had watched the ink take the date and then folded the page into a folder and did not look up. That stamp changed how she read offers of repair. Emma walked in from the side street exactly then, key in hand, rain on her jacket, and she did not hesitate. "Dad," she said, and the single word landed heavier than the rain. Emma's face had the tight set of someone who had learned to keep accounts of absence. She was 20, not a child, strong in the way that had been needed to hold the household steady. "Emma, Daniel," the sound small now. He stepped forward and she did not step back. "I can help. I'm trying to be better." Emma's jaw tightened. "Trying is not enough, Dad. You left. You'd be home. You'd come to the parent-teacher night. You'd pay." She paused and the words did not finish. "Claire didn't come looking for this life because she wants to be alone." The accusation sat clean and sharp. She used Claire's name like a shield and a claim. Claire watched Emma watch Daniel. The daughter's verdict shifted the entire room. Anger came next, quick and hot inside Claire, not the hollow rage shown on television but a hands-on logistical anger that needed boxes, schedules, and a boundary. Claire remembered stepping through the months that followed Daniel's absences and building stability. Fixed bills, a new bedtime for Emma, a savings plan, the neighbor who took the trash when Claire worked late. She felt the shift from doubt toward purpose. "Emma, please." Daniel, and his voice nudged toward pleading. "I know I hurt you. I know I wasn't there. But I'm here now. Let me." Emma cut him off. "Let you what?" "Re-enter and undo all the choices we had to make." Her words were quick, and there were 3 small exchange lines that followed between them. "Dad, you left. I did leave. And I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't help with tuition. It doesn't help at parent-teacher night, the back, and..." Fourth had the sharp rhythm the rules asked for. Short lines, names used, and a stack of particulars. Claire watched Daniel's expression as the facts came at him. He had changed in ways that could be documented. Receipts, cancelled accounts, a counselor's note signed with a date. He opened the envelope on the kitchen table and spread the papers like a person laying down captured evidence at a trial. The light from the overhead fixture reflected on a corner of a bank statement and on a stamped letter from a therapist's office. "Look, I kept a journal. I have a counselor. Here is the deposit I left for Emma's college fund. Here is the letter from my employer offering regular hours. I know I could have done this earlier, Claire, I know that. But I did it. I can be here. I am here now. Sophie picked up one of the documents and read silently. She looked at Claire and then back at Daniel. This is something. It doesn't erase what happened, she said. But Daniel, why now? Why tonight? Daniel closed his eyes for a second and let out a breath. Because the last time I saw you with the blue cardigan, he stopped. And Claire felt the memory of the folded cardigan as concrete as the coffee mug that had jumped in the first chapter. Because I woke up and knew it was the last thing I could cling to. Because I saw the folder on the table and the stamp and I realized I had made the wrong choice for the wrong reasons. He looked at Claire with honest exhaustion. There was a shift in the room. Claire moved from testing to curiosity and then to suspicion again. The first emotion at the door had been betrayal. Now she felt a cautious shift toward calculation. She wanted to know practical things, the cadence of his new routine, names and times. She wanted to see whether the evidence mapped onto daily life, or if it was theta. Daniel, Claire slowly, list me your week. Tell me how you will be inside this house. Tell me what time you will get home. Tell me who watches Emma if you are late. Tell me who will pick up the groceries, he answered, and his lines came quicker when calmed by structure. I'll be off work by 5 on weekdays. I'll pick up groceries on Tuesdays. I arranged with Mies Floors to pick up Emma from the community college on Wednesdays for 2 months. I signed up for counseling every Thursday at 6. I blocked my nights for family dinners. I turned in my bike hours and I'm keeping a journal with dates. The speech was less apology and more list. It tried to convert intention into timetabled facts. Sophie wrote half of it down on a scrap of paper and did not look like she believed every line. Emma folded her arms and looked at the parking street through the window. She had the exact look of a person deciding whether to grant access to a room her family no longer used him in. Then Claire, the question that tested whether the evidence could become safety. Who will hold you accountable, Daniel? If you fall back, who calls you out? Who makes you pay rent for not being there? She held the pen in her hand like a judge holding a gavel. Daniel's fingers trembled just enough that the paper shifted. I put my counselor's number on this page. I gave Sophie access to the savings account to monitor deposits until she says otherwise. He swallowed. I'll sign a document with you that says what I agree to. I'll agree to check-ins. I'll leave keys with Emma for emergencies only. I'll do what you ask. His rhythm slowed. He tried to meet the logistics with practical gestures. They argued for half an hour with short lines. At one point, Claire and Sophie had 3 quick back and forths. We need proof of sustained change. This is 2 months of paperwork. Sustained means more than paper. Those counterpoints made the air in the kitchen crisp with a new kind of test. The argument was not dramatic in a cinematic scream. It was practical and precise. It centered on boundaries and accountability. Then an unexpected sound came from the hallway. A quiet clearing of a throat and the measured footstep of someone who did not belong to the house before. Liam stood in the doorway, jacket over his arm, steady and quiet. He had been showing up for Saturday carpentry lessons with Emma and for small repairs. He never took a central role, but tonight his presence shifted the balance. Liam did not speak quickly. He looked at Claire and then at Daniel. He had the slow certainty of someone who had built his life by arriving when he had said he would. Claire, he's here with documents. He can show you everything. But I want you to know Claire has a new work schedule starting next month. She accepted the offer at the clinic across town. She wants you to know what that means to the household. His tone was not accusatory. It was practical, the same way he tightened a bolt to exact measurement. Claire's mouth opened. Liam, the name was a soft anchor you heard. Daniel looked stunned. Liam shrugged just enough that the rain on his shoulders made a faint sound. She me to wait until tonight. I didn't come to break anything. I came because Claire me to be there in case she needed support. I'm not moving you out, Daniel. I'm saying Claire has already rearranged things, so you can't assume we'll fit back in. He put his jacket over a chair and looked at Emma. Emma, I can take the spare key when you say. I can drive the forms to the counselor if you need. But this isn't about me. It's about what Claire is building. His voice offered practical support rather than sympathy. The unexpected arrival shifted the power. Claire felt the ground move from negotiation toward decision. She had planned for nights like this. She had considered what a reappearance might look like. She had not expected Liam to appear as a steady presence that made Daniel look like a visitor at a house that already had a life. Daniel's face fell. "Liam," he said, and the name came with a question. "Emma took a step forward. Liam's helped when you weren't here, Dad. He mended the fence you promised to fix last summer. He drove me to work when you missed shifts. He shows up." Her voice was not triumphant. It was a ledger of acts that had weight. She looked at Claire. "We don't have to explain everything to him. He knows how to help." The room filled with specifics: a fixed fence, a ride to work, a steady presence. The tension ratcheted up toward the climax. Daniel's desperate confession at the dining table. He moved to sit and Claire did not stop him. She had told herself she would listen. She had told herself she would test evidence and not be swayed by the speed of his apologies. "Claire, Daniel," and opened his hands as if the papers could become a proof of transformation. "I almost lost it when you folded that cardigan into a box. I almost lost the house in the way I kept taking my things. I didn't notice how much you did. I had a reckoning. I did not want to be the man who cost you everything. I sold things. I rehired. I started counseling. I wrote down each time I kept a promise. I'm trying to show you that I can be someone who stays." His words now carried a different weight. They were meant to match the documents. Claire watched him. She watched the tips of his fingers tremble over a dated note from a counselor. She watched the faint line at his temple move when he swallowed. She remembered the first chapter. The kitchen door slammed, a ceramic mug jumped in her hand, and she folded the blue cardigan into a box. She remembered the clerk slapping the rubber stamp into the folder and the emptiness that followed. Those events remained factual anchors in her decision-making. She one more question, the one that would make this evidence matter or not. Who for this changed? Daniel. You or someone who wanted you to? Her eyes were calm. Daniel's throat tightened. He looked down at the papers as if their print might answer. "I asked for this change," he said. "I got tired of being the man who left. I got tired of seeing Emma's face when I wasn't there. I thought I could fix it. But I was late." His voice cracked on the last word. Emma nothing at first. Sophie folded her arms and let the clock tick. Then Emma reached across and picked up one small paper from Daniel's stack and read the counselor's schedule. "Therapy every Thursday since March," she said. "That's 9 months. Dad, it's something. It doesn't erase your absences, but it's not nothing." The admission tightened and relaxed the room at once. It was neither verdict nor absolution, only fact. At that point Claire felt an internal pivot. From suspicion toward something like measured doubt, then again toward clarity. She did not want to be swayed by a neat stack of papers, but she also wanted to be fair to the people she still loved. That was what drove her hands when she reached toward the small wooden box on the bedside table later that night. But first there was one more unexpected reveal that shifted the listener's understanding of Daniel's motives. Sophie set the bank statement on the table and peered at a line Claire had missed. A large transfer from Daniel's account 2 months earlier into a joint account Claire had opened with Emma after the separation. "Daniel, Sophie, why did you move that money?" Daniel's shoulders sagged. "I moved it because I wanted to guarantee Emma's tuition without asking Claire to rely on a promise. I wanted to make something irreversible to show I meant it." He looked at Claire with a desperate quiet. "I was trying to make a thing that couldn't be taken back. I thought if I could make a deposit that was real, you might trust me enough to let me try." His mouth made a small, bitter smile. The reveal changed how his earlier actions were read. It was not only about words, but about a tangible attempt to make amends. Claire paused. The new information was a small twist. He had acted on his own to create a safety net for Emma. It complicated the ledger of failure and repair. The twist did not erase the past. It recast it in a way that demanded reassessment. They had another quick exchange, 3 short lines that cut and tested. "You waited until things fell apart. I didn't wait. I was scared. Scared or selfish." Each line pushed at Daniel's claim to have changed. Claire stood up and walked slowly to the bedroom. The house felt like an organism that had already reorganized itself. Liam's jacket on a chair, Emma's textbooks stacked on the desk, Sophie's mug cooling by the sink. The bedroom had the small wooden box on the bedside table. The box held tokens. A theater ticket with a date that no longer meant anything, a silver ring that had been a promise once, a small Polaroid of a summer barbecue, where all three of them had laughed in a way Claire had once believed would be permanent. She set the papers aside and opened the box. Her fingers trembled only slightly. She touched the ring and the photo, name tags on concrete things. She thought of the cardboard box she had packed earlier in the year when she folded the blue cardigan. She thought of the rubber stamp at the clerk's desk. She had rehearsed the final move, to close the box and set it aside, to mark the past as something kept but not opened. Daniel followed her into the room. He moved as if drawn by the magnet of the items. Please, Claire. Please don't do this yet. Let me help you. Let me be present. The cadence in his voice shifted between pleading and pleading for practical measures. Claire did not speak for a full 5 seconds. She lifted the ring, then set it back in the box. She looked at the Polaroid and noticed Emma's hair tied with a ribbon Claire had bought the summer before the last fight. She felt the muscle in her jaw tighten, not for speech but for the decision she had rehearsed. Daniel, she said, and the name carried finality. You changed. You can show me the papers, you can keep counseling, you can be consistent. But you can't move back into this house and expect that choice to be the same as it was before. You can't walk in and fix a life you weren't part of building. You broke the trust that let us assume you would be there. I'm not asking you to leave the neighborhood. I'm asking you to accept that we built stability without you and that some doors cannot be relocked the same way. She spoke clearly, with the measured cadence of someone used to giving orders to get things done. He tried another line. I can wait. I can sign agreements. I can meet every condition. Claire, I'll do anything you ask. He spoke quickly now, trying to convert his desire into contract. Emma stepped forward and said, Claire, what do you want? Her voice was direct. Claire held the ring in the box and then reached out to close the lid. Her hand paused for a small, careful second. The pause held the tiny knot of decision-making. She wanted to protect Emma and the life she had built. She wanted to avoid being pulled back into a pattern that had cost them time, money, and peace. She closed the box. The lid clicked on the wood, and the click was the small, concrete sound that ended the argument. Daniel made a noise that was half apology, half surrender. Claire, he said, and for a moment his voice was only a roughened baritone. Please. One more chance. Claire handed him the sealed box without opening it again. This is mine to keep. I will decide what to do with it. You will not be the one to open it. You will not be the person to make that choice for us anymore. Her short sentences left no room for misinterpretation. He took the box with hands that trembled and then steadied as if to hide the shaking. He looked at Emma, at Sophie, and finally back at Claire. Can I see her sometimes? He asked. Emma's face was hard but not cruel. You can see me if you show up when you say you will, Dad. Start by showing up for one counseling session with proof of attendance. She used specific conditions. The exchange had the practical shape of someone establishing a boundary. Sophie stepped forward and said, Daniel, we'll help arrange the first step. But Claire's decision is final about this house. She put the practical plan into play. We'll set the schedule together. We'll track the check-ins. If you prove consistent, we'll consider more access. Daniel nodded, the motion small and earnest. Thank you, he said. He left the house after putting his folded papers into an envelope and tucking the sealed box under his arm. The porch light reflected on the rain on his jacket as he walked down the front steps. Claire watched him go. She felt the tiredness that comes from making a boundary, the kind that is not cinematic catharsis but physical work. The tightening of a jaw, the steadying of breath, the slow release of tension. The immediate aftermath required action. Sophie and Liam and Emma organized the receipts, moved the furniture slightly, made notes about changing locks and schedules. They spoke in short, dry sentences about who would drive where, who would call which number, and what time Emma's classes would be. The change was logistical and ordinary, not rhetorical. Outside, Claire walked down the residential street at dusk with the sealed wooden box in her satchel and her well-worn leather satchel across her shoulder. The dusk had warm, golden reflections on puddles from earlier rain. She held the box as if it were a package of decisions, small objects that mattered because they recorded what she had chosen to keep. She did not look back until she reached the corner at the bus stop. At the corner she paused and took out the small gold locket she always wore. She touched it and then zipped the satchel shut. She took a breath and felt the muscles loosen in a way that meant relief and grief at once. She did not voice the feelings. She folded them into each step she took away from the house and toward the clinic, where she would start a new shift in a month. The choice had been made and the household would rearrange itself around it. The final concrete beat came when her phone buzzed with a short message from Emma. Door plan set, locks changed, counseling set for Thursday at 6, be home by 8. Claire smiled and typed back, yes. I'll be home, she walked on. The house sat behind her under a sodium streetlight. The wooden box rested against her ribs. She felt the weight of the objects inside, the ring, the photo, the ticket, exactly as things with histories, not as metaphors. The chapter closed with her step onto the bus and the sound of the driver calling the route. The door she had closed months earlier had been closed again, sealed by a small click and by practical steps. Claire had listened, tested, and then chosen safety and dignity. That choice rearranged everyone's future in plain, documentable ways. The night carried the ordinary noises of a neighborhood shifting around one woman's decision. Claire did not leave unanswered questions in the house tonight. She left instructions, keys in the hands of adults she trusted, schedules on paper, and a sealed box that stayed hers. The last paragraph of the chapter ends with her closing the bus door behind her as she steps toward the clinic where she will start the next paid shift, a practical, contractual step forward rather than a speech about a new life. The bus pulled away and the porch light blinked as the rain picked up again, small practical sounds that matched the concrete events of the evening.